Okay, so while you were gone, what I ended up doing was very simple. I just created three new layers, sorry, and I've imported my deep, mid, and epidermal maps that we've painted from previous chapters. And then along with that are the original projections that we just did. So I want to touch upon talking a bit about scleras, because I think a common problem people suffer from when they're painting eyes is that they tend to paint the scleras too white and too bright, and they end up looking pretty much like this, where they're kind of glowing, or they're too perfect, and it starts going into that Pixar realm. And a nice trick and key when you're painting scleras and dialing it in for the skin is you want to make sure that the sclera gamma, the brightness of the sclera, doesn't exceed the gamma and the brightness of the skin. The second it does, it starts glowing and it starts looking too white and too artificial. So right out of the box, we know this is a problem we're experiencing right now. So what I'm just going to do, and this is very basic, is I'm just going to go in and color correct slightly, but mainly change the value a bit. So I'm going to tone this down, and then because it's the epidermal layer, I'm actually going to desaturate this quite a bit, like so. And that's pretty good for us. So you can see the eye whites are much more in line. They're a slightly bit brighter, but I'm not too worried about that. The key is that it's much more in line with the skin in terms of the brightness. So it's not going to be popping out of the head and looking really artificial. Now, actually, now I'm thinking about it, I do want the irises to pop. I want that color to pop. I want to get that nice range of reds and greens and some slight blues. So I'm going to just quickly add a layer mask and paint some of this back. Ever so slightly. We do want some of this in here so we can get that pop of color that I'm looking for, like so. So this is a good basis for the epidermal eye color. I'm happy with this. Getting nice variation in there, and it's reading really well. I just want to double check that I have pure black in this pupil, because right now I don't think I do. Paint this back in. Like so. Do the same for the other eye. It's very important to make sure that this inner eye, this pupil area, is black. Now this is one way we can do it, is just take a paintbrush like I'm doing, or another way we can do it is grab this iris and we're going to duplicate it. And I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to add a levels. And a luminance. So we get that clean edge there. And then I'm going to layer mask this. And then with a paintbrush, paint it back in. That. So we're maintaining that crisp edge a bit. So I don't have to fight that with some quick paint. And then in here, I'm actually going to turn that off for a second. I should do saturation. Turn that back a bit. Oh, sorry. Do another saturation value. Turn that back a bit. There we go. I like this method because I'm getting this nice edge breakup, which is very important. We don't want, that's another thing people suffer from, is that they do too clean of a pupil, it's a perfect circle, and 2, it's a perfect hard edge, which we don't want. So this method allows me to maintain that and stay true to the image itself. Whereas here it starts getting blurry and kind of not so good. So I'm actually going to go back here and delete that, and then here paint it up just like the other one, and then I'm now getting a crisper edge, which I'm happier with. But let's see, I'm still seeing a bit of noise in there. So I guess I'm going to do a bit of both. I'll go back to this pupil layer and taking a black brush and being careful that I don't hit the edges. Just going in. Painting some of that out slightly. So as you can see, this is a bit of experimentation. See what you like and what works best. Oops, let's pick that first. And same thing over here. Just getting some of these wispy flyaways out. Like so. And there we go. So we get some nice cleanup there on the pupils, so they're pure black, which is going to really help. I'm going to take all this, going to group it. And then I'm going to grab all these and group these. Copy and paste this group and just move it on up for the mid scatter. And group this. So just like what we do basically in Photoshop. Let's check the eyes. So now I want to get a little bit more warmth, but just slightly. Just want to quickly clean this up a bit so I know what I'm looking at. So I'm going to go back in here and get some of that saturation back. And it's kind of the opposite now. Now I want to make sure I tone back just slightly some of this iris. So I'm going to just do another adjustment layer, saturation. Hide that. Quickly go in here and paint some of that back. So you're getting some of that out of there, so it doesn't kind of glow. Want to be careful we don't get any areas that kind of glow, because it will start glowing in the render and look a bit artificial, like so. So I'm happy with that. Next, moving on to the deep. So let's group this. And let's readjust this. So one thing I do with the deep scatter for the eyes is I don't want to go too red for this, because I don't want her eyes to look bloodshot. In fact, what I like doing is cooling it off a bit. Actually, that's not going to work. I'll do that up in a second. But what I'm trying to do is get these veins to show up a bit more. So they read a bit better. And then from here, I'm actually going to paint out the iris, because I want to do something different to that. Because as you can see right now, it's just going a little too crazy. I don't want it to look like she's been strangled or something and bloodshot around this edge here. Do the same down here. Clean this up. and then want to do some color correction overall. Get more of the blues and less of the reds in there. I think I've gone too far with this levels and the saturation. So, like I said, this is, again, more experimentation. And what I end up doing is taking maps like this and pulling them into the shader, rendering, and see how I go. But generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with these sclera. However, I want to do more to this iris because it's looking a bit bland and dead. So let's try to get some more of that back in. Actually, that's not working. So what I'm going to do is, I'm done with that. I'm actually going to go in here and copy and paste this base. I'm going to delete everything I've done in here. So I have the factory settings for this eye. I'm going to go back in and add a hue saturation values. Don't worry about dialing in this iris. Sorry, this, yeah, the iris. And then from here, I'm going to close that out and mask this. Go back in here and paint it back in. Like so. So I'm getting the original warmth back in, which is what I want. An original color. Awesome. And there we go. So I'm pretty happy with the basis for all these maps. So I got the deep scatter, mid, and the epidermal. So adding these all together, I'm going to get a really nice result. This may be going a bit too purpley for me, but the key is just I want it to look a lot cooler than the skin itself, because with all these skin maps, the skin's going to go pretty warm, and I want those eyes to go a little bit cooler because I don't want it to look like she's been crying. I don't want it to look like she's has some infection in her eye, or it's just getting irritated. I want it to be a bit cooler than the skin. So I'm happy with all this. So in the next section, I'm going to jump into painting the secondary maps, the spec and displacement.